All right, so we are continuing again today with the Conservation Stories Canada series of interviews. Over the last few weeks, I've had the distinct pleasure of getting to talk with people coast to coast across Canada, featuring stories of their work saving wild places, wild species, and just featuring them. We've had some really incredible people on the broadcast over the last little bit, so I'm excited today to introduce Charly Plaisir. He lists on his website that he is a trilingual French-Canadian of Haitian descent. And I want to start with this, Charly, and just ask, being trilingual, having that backdrop, does that allow you to tell more stories? Does it allow you to get more access to stories? You're an aspiring sort of conservation filmmaker. You've done work all around the world. Does that backdrop allow you to do better work?
Great question, Jesse. I actually think being trilingual is something that has been very useful to me in many ways. Basically, I've been working in Canada, been working in the US. I worked across the world in New Zealand, Australia as well. I haven't worked in the Spanish-speaking countries in a while, though. I spent a few weeks in the Galapagos Islands and in Ecuador doing some conservation work as well. But I think aside from working directly with the population or the group of people that speaks a certain language, it's most interesting for me to actually be able to connect with them on a different level. As an example, when we do some workshop classes and different classes across, let's say, the province of Quebec, I know I'll be interacting with students from different backgrounds, right? Students from Haiti, students from South America, as an example, and being able to not necessarily talk a different language with them, but understand where they come from and their upbringing can make me connect with them in a different way. That can be very useful, actually, to tell stories in an engaging way for students. So I don't necessarily think I need to actively speak a different language to connect with students, but it's really a good tool for me to be able to connect with them on a different level when I want to teach them about something specific.
Yeah. That is a beautiful answer. You mentioned going all over the world for this work, and I know that your master's thesis involved work in Australia on kangaroos. So how did that experience, how does going halfway around the world to study and understand animals loop back into the work that you want to tell either in Canada or internationally? What's that backdrop like?
That's a great question, and I think I'll jump off of that with a question I get very often, which is, why would a Canadian ecologist go to Australia to study kangaroos? Because if you're pretty aware, we don't have many kangaroos in Canada except in zoos, or a few ones that have been lost on the airplane. But as we go to the field to Australia, that's the main thing that we really wanted to discover is how they interact with their environment. And the thing with Australia is that the environment is extremely variable, extremely unpredictable, which is something that we can expect to be happening later on in the Northern Hemisphere countries like Canada, the US. The situation is that kangaroos are large mammals, right? They're marsupials, but they're very similar to the deer species we find in North America as well, which makes them a very easy species to look at and to be able to extrapolate their reaction they have on the field with the unpredictable climate of Australia to the species we have up here in North America. And for me, as a Canadian ecologist, to go out to Australia, of course, is an amazing thing because you interact with so many amazing species, right? You, of course, have all the marsupial species, the kangaroos, the wallabies, the wombats, the koalas, but also you also have so many amazing bird species, some parrots that are so colorful that fly over your head and bother you when you're trying to capture individuals, right? So it's a pretty amazing experience. And for someone who doesn't come from Australia, it's definitely something that's incredible to witness.
Yeah, I love this. And I love this idea of sort of a kangaroo being like a deer analog. And this is something that I've had the chance to hear about from other animals around the world, that it's all interconnected. We have this global relationship where if you understand species or habitats or ecosystems in one place, you can, connect that to what you're studying close to home, which is fantastic. So you don't just study these animals. You're not just out there looking at them and doing research. You're filmmaking. You're taking tons of photography. You're very skilled at this. Why is this so important to you? Why do you want to convey these stories visually to people?
That's a good question. I think that was one of the main reasons why I wanted to pursue in the field of ecology, because I do have a great love for science, but I also have I'm a huge fan of storytelling, of inspiring people with nature stories. And I think filming and being able to create amazing stories from what people can actually see is something I value a lot. And especially in this digital age, right? We have the opportunity to have cameras at a pretty accessible price and be able to broadcast and film and also publish our videos online very easily. So I think it's an amazing chance we have to be able to be not only researchers, but also being storytellers and to show to the world how accessible this world is, right? Being a researcher, being a scientist is not something that is only reserved to the elite, but it's also reserved to whoever wants to tell a story, wants to learn a bit more about their natural environment. For me, from the moment I traveled to Galapagos Islands, I'm sure we'll get to that a bit later. And from the moment I traveled to the islands, I found out that of course, I love the ecological world. I love talking about Darwin's theories and what he found out while looking at the finches and the giant tortoises, but also being able to take something without disturbing the species, taking something, bring it back to my people in Canada. For the people who cannot travel or don't have the ability to travel, being able to be that let's say medium that can bring whatever amazing thing I was able to witness and bring it back to them is something I value a lot and something I would like to keep doing, regardless of what I pursue later in life.
Yeah. Very, very cool. And you don't just tell stories of this sort of charismatic megafauna. You're particularly fond of insects and these sort of shiny invertebrates in the undergrowth. How did that inspiration start, and why is that so important to you to share those stories?
Oh, great question. That's funny. I was in Rimouski, up northeast Quebec, doing some field work for helping out a master's student during summer of my undergrad, and we were working on dragonflies. And for those who don't know, dragonflies are amazing predatory insects that are, I mean, they're amazing to watch. I think this is probably the coolest animal species, except for kangaroos, of course, but one of the coolest animal species you can actually see, and especially when you can see it from up close and interact with many of them. So we had to capture dragonflies, which is pretty amazing because we had these butterfly nests and we were pretty much chasing them around the national park near the Parc National du Bic in Quebec. And from that moment, I realized how beautifully engineered these species were. All the insect species that have different roles in the environment. Dragonflies are very useful to the environment because they're predators. They prevent other insects to proliferate too much in certain environments, which makes them very useful. And they're also a food source for larger bird species. And for me, I don't know, I stumbled upon at some point a photographer, a macro photographer Instagram page. His name is Thomas Shahan. And he had this amazing method to capture tiny parts of insects, which was called I don't need to get too deep in the details, but it was pretty much just taking your camera lens and just flipping it backwards on the body of your camera. That way it would make some sort of magnifying lens effect, and you could see amazing things without even buying a piece of the camera, a new camera piece. I started doing that, and I had so much fun just finding new settings in my camera just by doing that. After that, I bought some more gear to increase the level of magnifying I can do with my camera, and it was amazing because I started seeing some crazy aspects of the insects, some crazy features, and I also could create amazing backgrounds just by simply using the lighting differently. If you go on my website, there's a picture of a spider that I took a few years back, and it almost looked like I had the black screen right behind the spider because I was using a special type of flash just to make the focus on the spider itself. And this is probably the most amazing thing to realize you can actually create a whole world by taking a picture. And this is pretty much the same concept I use when I make my videos, right? You want to create a certain world, and you want to locate your species in that world and tell them how amazing that species is, and make the focus on that species in your environment. So I think that's a really cool thing that I found out while being in Rimouski, and I'm sure I'm gonna take some time to spend to do more macro photography when I have time, for sure.
Yeah. At the risk of taking up all my free time, I'm going to hit you up to learn how to do that sort of thing, because I would love to be able to take pictures of all the cool stuff in my backyard.
Right.
So you talked about the Galapagos. You talked about telling stories of Charles Darwin and his work. And so sort of as a wrap up here, I want to talk about your willingness or interest in telling stories that might be controversial, might present difficulties for people. Like it's all good and well to say, look, here's some amazing animals. Everyone gets behind that. Everyone's excited about that. But when you're diving into topics that might throw people off, conservation stories can have some difficult elements to them. What's your approach to that? I'm just curious.
Oh, good question. I think conservation stories would be something very interesting for me to tackle at some point in my life, because I always think that there's a broader message that we could, the push when we work in these creative media, and I believe that I would be very comfortable working in such a field because it's very important to respect the opinion of others and the way other people think. It's also important to understand that the science and the scientific facts that we use to push different measures or different policies have to be taken into account and have to be respected. And being able to be a voice for conservation stories would be a great example for me to put my skill set and my passion to the greater good, right? And to and to make it very useful to the population to be able to talk about certain topic. Let's say there's an example. We had deer, the population of deer on the south shore of Montreal that were proliferating. There were too many of them in that area, which was getting pretty dangerous because there was many roadkills in that area. And some people were, or the government or the city hall basically was saying that we should kill off a few of them because there were too many of them. That could be bad for the environment, but dangerous for people driving along the road. But on the other end, there was an outrage from the population because they were wondering, why don't we just relocate them? Then the question is, can we just relocate animal species somewhere else just because we don't want to kill them off? It's not that simple, right? And for people to understand the biology behind this and how important it is to take the right measures and not just relocate species because we don't want to kill them off is something important to me, because we're in a society now where everyone has the right to his or her opinion, and that's a good thing. But at the same time, every opinion will be heard almost equally with social media. So it's important for people to be very educated about the topics before expressing themselves on different situations. And I think being a voice for conservation by creating video content that's accessible to everyone would be a good way to let's say, limit that issue.
That was a great specific example, and kudos to you for that sort of evidence-based work that you're looking to do. Charly, this has been fantastic, man. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
Thank you so much, Jesse.